Hello and welcome to Sean's Thoughts. Yeah, I apologize for being a little late. Actually, I want to share with you right now where I'm at. Welcome to Sean's Thoughts. I'm on the wind. This is where I'm at right now. It's a place in Hope, BC, British Columbia, Canada. And I'm at this rather old church building. And I thought I would just show the name plaque of the building because, I thought it was, I don't know, I was just passing on here through today during this extra windy day. That's partially why I was a little later than I anticipated to come and talk to my talk today. Sorry. As I try to do things different ways, like I wanted to show that sign at the same time. I realized I hadn't made the announcement that I was going to be live streaming, so I had to do that as well as I was walking over there. So it's always about making those moments that you don't expect to happen and just roll with them, not being overly concerned about things. For instance, I'm not sure how much again that this wind is playing. I listened to the other one and when I was out by the river a couple days ago, and that audio was perfectly fine. Well, perfectly as best as it could in the circumstances. Yeah, this place is quite well known for wind, at least whenever I'm here. There's always seemed to be windy. Actually, when I came back last night from Manning Park, it wasn't windy, and with that brought mosquitoes. So now, with the wind, of course, there won't be any mosquitoes to be concerned with. I got a couple mosquito bites now on my legs and such, but we're here for each other. My legs are there for them, and you know, I'm sure they do something positive as well for and as all God's creatures do. So yeah, I kind of had this talk or this idea today to talk about, you know, what I wrote in the thumbnail that I reused after recreating it for an older talk. I thought it was a really cool thumbnail, and I really would love to do another talk. But yet, when I was walking by this place this morning, I guess I found it very unique. Actually, when I read on the plaque about it, is this type of church was a Gothic church. And I always have associated Gothic with, all black and, more so your heavy metal and slightly satanic at sometimes. Although, there's groups like I can't imagine the singer Amy Lee, who's one of the lead singers or the lead singer of Evanescence. And although I would kind of say that's Gothic or whatever, it, it definitely provides an idea of immense beauty, and at least in her voice and how I hear the songs. Anyways, I'm going all off on the word goth, but yeah. So this church is like very old, and regardless if we're in a matrix, it's definitely copied after something, and it's very unique architecture. And yeah, and I thought it was very interesting that it was just as it said on the plaque, I'll read it to make sure, it's the Christ Church, and all the way from 1861. So it's like pretty old. I guess kind of what interests me as I sit here and consider this is that, you know, there's no mention of the first name. And, that kind of goes into the reality that I kind of imagined growing up, is that I didn't recognize that, Christ had a first name. I just saw Christ as a name for, you know, God. And so when I was growing up, I didn't even know, like I knew who the person or the being Jesus was, but I didn't recognize that Jesus and Christ were like supposedly the same person. And so it kind of shows, like, when I go to this church that's so old, is that perhaps at one time that connection wasn't that, or maybe it was a different name or a different connection or something. This wind seems to be coming from every single direction. It's very, very interesting. Yeah, it's really weird. It's coming from behind me, side me, everywhere. So I'm having a little more challenge controlling this microphone. So yeah, I, I don't know really, therefore, what I'm here to talk about, other than I walked their little labyrinth thing that was on the ground, and I learned that a labyrinth is basically not a maze, but more so as a path that goes all around until it finally gets into the center. I always thought a labyrinth was a maze, but there's another plaque that talks about a labyrinth being what they're displaying here. And I unknowingly just walked in and walked the whole thing. It's pretty cool. Pretty cool, very meditative, because I was just focusing on where I was going next, and I wasn't really, looking at anywhere else other than my feet, because it's ground maze, or there I go again, a ground labyrinth. Yeah, just kind of opens up the idea that perhaps our idea of what we think history was, when you go to places like where I'm at right now, where they've maintained a lot of their history, that perhaps things are, considerably different. And I'm always thinking about all the differences of what history could be, and not for the reason that I could ever go back and change it, nor would I ever really want to go back and change it. Things happened and they happened and their history. But for me, being aware of our history allows for a greater awareness. And I think through a greater awareness of what our history was, we're perhaps more apt to, you know, roll with forgiveness. See, and maybe we're going right into what I was actually putting the thumbnail up, strangely enough, is that when we have that awareness and we know what things triggered events in our past, and we know like who was believing they were in charge when we thought something else was in charge and all that stuff. And, when we start to recognize all of the deception, duplicity in our lives, then having that knowledge, that awareness that it did happen is, firstly, we have the opportunity then to forgive, especially if for some reason our memories or our minds have been altered so that we perhaps forgot. I once recalled my grandmother turning to me in the kitchen, and she was kind of flabbergasted in a sense, but she turned to me and she goes, "Well, how much of your childhood do you actually remember?" And I'm like, "Well, not very much of it." And I think partly it is that as a child, we tend to forgive a lot easier. And then as we get into, more repeated cycles and expectations of outcomes, we forgive less, and where it takes a longer time to get to that state of forgiveness. But as a child, you know, we often just forget it and continue on. And doctors want to try to tell everyone that does that, and not saying it doesn't happen in sometimes, but to try to tell everyone that we're harboring traumas from our childhood and such. And perhaps in a sense we are, but nonetheless, fact says, based on my observation, that children forgive easier, and I think that I was definitely a candidate of that situation. And yet, as we get older, we forgive less. And honestly, we find more reasons to be upset at one another. Someone steals your parking space, or like you're planning on parking there and they drive in front of you. And I've done it before, and suddenly I'm frustrated. And it's usually not even for that reason. It's not for the missing parking spot. It's for, the culmination of all these smaller injustices, we'll call them, but nonetheless small fractures or distortions that into something much larger. And once again, it might not even be all those things. Those things simply might be a part of that triggering of a larger issue. So if someone was always stealing something from you, for instance, when you were in high school, and then someone steals your parking spot, or at least you had the perception it was yours because your eyes were stuck on it, that suddenly you go into that, you know, like that guy from the movie, I think it was Val Kilmer maybe, who had that, he got up in the middle of the traffic and just walked away from his car, kind of ideal on a hot day in rush hour traffic. When in reality, forgiveness would have made it a little bit easier. I know I'm essentially making jest of it, but I truly do believe that forgiveness through awareness leads into, therefore, as it says on the topic of the title, the co creative aspect. Because when we are forgiven and when we forgive, and I mean forgiven that we've forgiven ourselves and that we've forgiven others, forgiveness always being only on our side, really, it does not matter what the other person does. They can still, be mad after 2 years of an event that you didn't even necessarily perceive. One of the interesting stories I heard from someone about their high school graduation, and something that was actually in, I think it was an American Pie movie as an example. But when people are in high school, some people hold grudges or they're angry because in high school they perceive something one way, but yet another person's, like for instance the bully, might look back and think it's funny or think that he was such a good sport to go through with all that harassing, and you know they believe themselves to sometimes even be more nicer than they were. And yet, even those people in high school that harmed me and that mocked me, I forgave them as well. Because even through these last few months, you could say, coming to a better understanding of how our world was organized and why it was organized in the way it was, and, essentially what powers that weren't necessarily aware, or people weren't aware of everything that was around them. And a lot of time, these forces that were on the outside of us, they are the ones who actually convinced us. Now, I say they as in I personify them as beings, but whatever it is, and energies. Like, even if you imagine that the sun, for instance, shoots energy into our closed system called the earth, that there's energy, like there's more frequency, more, I guess, entropy maybe from that sun coming into our system. Like even wind is a really good example of that energy into influx, the increase in energy in the system, and then the energy essentially needs to like move around that system. And you could even say that like narcissistic energies were that as well, just perhaps maybe at a vibration where they could trigger a preferred state. If you've ever watched that movie Monsters Inc., I've often been told it's, very similar to a documentary, that there were, we'll call them energies, that their whole desire and purpose was to essentially create fear, create that adrenaline to burst, and then somehow that energy was bottled up. And not like, the baby bottles and such, but you never know, they might have been doing that too. But that, yeah. And so where I go with all of that is not necessarily to harp on that and to hold and tether myself to the past. It's the recognition that through that awareness that these things did happen, and therefore, recognizing the forces that were playing that were external to us, it's easier to therefore let it go. And by letting it go, we're releasing that tether. And as us being a big hot air balloon, we're floating off higher, much higher than this church, for example. And even when you look at how the church did what they did, and I mean the church, I mean more so as just organized religion, regardless of which one it was. Because in a sense, they all did a very valuable job at seeding some of the perhaps truths of our reality. And even in the word Christ, for example, I see the word crystalline, or I see the reflection, or not the reflection, but the idea of crystalline energy. And I see Christ as more of a frequency, the frequency of love and the connection between all beings. And that with the restoration of the crystalline energy or the Christ energy, or some people call it Christ consciousness, because what is consciousness but more, well, I'm using the word energy, but I have a different understanding of that. But for now, we'll just use the word energy. But that energy, that frequency is connects us. And, all religions had to, apparently by the rule of law, hold a certain amount of truth. And therefore, they had to bring that amount of truth through to us till we would maybe be able to see it through a different lens. a different perspective or perception. You know, it's like that time, those times when you've listened to things so many times, and then all of a sudden one day, click, something else that someone said suddenly made it all make sense. My former partner, she would always talk about that, about how she would keep saying the same thing over and over. And then suddenly later, someone says the same thing in her perspective because she knows what she was trying to perhaps communicate. But yet, for me, it, that new connection, that new understanding that suddenly, clicked all the pieces into place. And maybe that's what this whole podcast is about, is about finding different pieces for myself as I talk about them. But you also, as you listen, while you listen, allowing some of the pieces to connect in a different way, because yeah, they just did. I I truly do hope that it's not so windy. I once upon a time when I did windy audios, I would try to like use an AI to fix out and take out the wind, but now I recognize that, a lot of the things that I talk about, I can always talk about them again. That's even why I started laughing when they would distort my audios or make the audio disappear, or, actually when I look into the, what do you call it? Transcript, sometimes there's missing sentences in the transcript. Or I recently saw in this song by High Res where they actually switched the lyrics in uh, the automated transcript of the song that was taken from YouTube. So it's not like they didn't have the chance to. Anyways, yeah. So with all that being said, back to the co-creative part is that we create with, well, in the past, we created our future with our past experiences. And when we were holding on to all of those dramas and melodramas, and, he said, she said, and this person did that to me, and then we just keep repeating those stories every and any time that someone wants to listen to us, because that's apparently how we were programmed to relate. It really does create our future. It's that disconnection from those energies, especially the lower vibrational energies. From my former mentor, Kevin Trudeau, he introduced me to the idea that we are our frequency, anyways, the average of our 5 closest friends, or the people that we spend the most time with. So I was thinking about it, living in one place. And I've been living around certain people for such a long time that I essentially had become the average of those people, those energies that, maybe 5 is an abstract number, but it's the idea of those energies and those frequencies that we are around. We are that. And that's why it does definitely pay to pay dividends in currency, not money, to surround yourself by frequencies that align with the person and the being of who you are. And, for a long time, I've been talking about the desire to get out and adventure travel and to live a life like Ash Ketchum from Pokemon. And even though I had that desire, I still had the safety net of a home. And, and essentially, until my cat passed away, I wasn't willing to release that, because I knew that my cat was unable to go on a journey. I knew it perhaps from however it communicated to me, and that it loved only living in the house. It stayed, not even a house, it was an apartment. It only stayed in the apartment. It wouldn't go in the hallway of the apartment. It fell off the balcony a couple times when it was younger and got lost up in a tree. All those times it would fall off the balcony and then go and hide in the same tree until I came and got it. And of course it would, be challenging to even get it out of the tree. So this was definitely a cat who was going to stay in that house. And so when it passed away, I realized that that energy had finally been disconnected. And then all of a sudden things just started moving forward and I was on my way out. And that's where I find myself today, in front of a church. It's the Christ Church. It aligns, at least in the name for me, with the idea of, Christ as in crystalline energy, as in the Christ consciousness, the I am stuff. Like, I don't fully understand even all of that. Like, I read what I read, and I therefore know what I know about. And I've listened to the Samadhi movie 1, 2, and 3 like maybe 100 times. And yet I still feel more just connected with, God being the creator, God being the source of everything, including God, meaning that everything is of God, that we are of God, that we perhaps were created to co create with God, to see different perspectives, to be able to see, like for God to see from different experiences and different perspectives. Therefore, creatures would have to be given free will in order to make up their own choices. Yeah, since I lost my friend when I was only 13 years old, I kind of, gave up on there being a God in a building or a church or a religion. I would often find myself just talking to myself. And I guess in a sense that was, me intuitively connecting. I've come to understand that God is within us. And so therefore when we're seeking God within, turning within, like self-reflection is a really good example perhaps of a communication with God. Like being able to look at oneself internally and saying, "Hey, maybe I should go apologize," and then doing it immediately. Like, I found that honestly so rewarding when I started to get into an argument that I knew was going to turn into something, and then all of a sudden it's like screech. Actually, and then admitting it. Oh, sorry, I was wrong about that. And recognizing that. And even if the conversation went off the rails after that, sometimes even if you stop the car, other people are still going to keep driving. But we all have our own triggers and such, but it felt rewarding just and recognizing that and being aware. That goes back to awareness again, being aware that not all energies are our energies. Not all things that we say are necessarily our cross to bear, I guess is a good way. Because there at least were. Alobar right now would say that, we're almost all done with those other forces. Maybe even, other people would say the same thing as well. But at one point in time, there were entities and such, as I was mentioning before, that would perhaps, get off on us screaming and yelling and cursing and getting angry, and maybe even the other higher vibration ones too. Yeah, it's all until things come into full realization and truth is finally revealed, there's still, I guess, opportunities to learn. It's always a good way to see everything, is that everything, including the stage that we just finished our production on, as a great opportunity to learn. And, some people will still continue to learn, perhaps. And other people, just like I have, if I want to live that life, I literally have to go out against all odds and just go live that life, because there is the trust that that love is there, that connection is there, and will be there, or that net kind of idea, that unseen security, that faith in what one believes, I think is extremely important. I often wonder, like, what was it like here in 1961? Or sorry, 1861, when this place was supposedly built. Like, I just imagine the people walking around wearing different clothes, and the horse carriages pulling up for Sunday church. That's one thing that, I would love to be able to have the ability to do, is to time travel. Or perhaps not time travel, but just visit realities that I would like to, experience. like running with the dinosaurs. Hopefully, like the Palisauruses or some, nice dinosaurs, not the carnivorous ones. Anyways, thank you so much for sharing your time and attention with me in this very old building. You know, I think all of the puzzle pieces are fitting together and everything is coming together. And while it may not be on our preferred timetable, I think that, you know, a lot of the blessings are here. It's just a matter of pulling back that last layer of cellophane, that clear plastic. And maybe this plastic is just distortive enough so that what I'm seeing is almost the perfect reality. And then from there, we can start co creating again. Once again, I apologize for the wind if it caused any issues, and I appreciate so much all of your attention. Have a wonderful evening, and God bless. And well, may the force be with you. Or actually, I'd like to say, may the source be with, which of course the source is. So much love.